everyone, it's Meg, and today I am going to be sharing with you guys some tips for getting into poetry. A little while ago I did a video about my poetry book collection, and poetry is something that I love. I feel like you guys should know that by now. And I have been wanting to do a beginner's guide to poetry, I guess, for a while, and I have finally decided to do it. I feel like I've got some good information and tips that hopefully can help you guys if you are a beginner when it comes to poetry and you're looking to get into it. So I thought I would share them with you today. I still feel like I'm very much an amateur when it comes to poetry. There is still lots that I need to learn, so many poets that I need to discover, but these are some tips that I feel like I have used and some you guys should hopefully find helpful when it comes to poetry, specifically reading poetry. That is mainly what this is going to be about. I may do a writing one in the future, but that's probably going to be quite a long way into the future, as I am obviously still working on my writing myself. But yeah, I thought I would do this video. I've been wanting to do it for ages, so we're going to do it. So without further ado, let's get into the video. I feel like the first tip when it comes to getting into poetry is to not be intimidated. I feel like a lot of people are put off by poetry or just don't even touch it because they feel intimidated, scared, they feel like they won't understand it, that it's not accessible, and all of that is not true. I feel like a lot of people feel this way mainly because of school, because of books and different sorts of poems that we read at school. You may not have enjoyed them very much, it may have sucked the joy out of it, I guess, and that's made a lot of people lose interest in it, and it kind of did that to me for a certain extent, but just school in general made me not interested in a lot of things that I used to be. But the first thing is to just not be intimidated, because there are so many different sorts of poetry, so many different poets, so many different forms. There is bound to be something for everybody to enjoy, no matter the beginner or your level or your style. There is something out there for everybody, and it is all perfectly accessible. And I feel like the key to getting into poetry is finding out what you like. So there are many different ways for doing this. Like I said, there are many different forms of poetry, many different genres, formats, different styles, and different sorts of poets. There are so many different sorts, so the key thing, I guess, to getting into it and to actually enjoying poetry is to find out what you like and what you dislike. Because the same goes with novels. Obviously everybody has so many different tastes with different genres. It's the same with poetry. Obviously everybody has their own personal opinion on what they like and don't like, which is what makes this community so great. One way that you can find some poems that you like or some poets that you like is to access some poetry magazines, journals, whether they are physical or online, as generally they have lots of different poets and new upcoming poets as well, with different sorts of work, and maybe some tips on reading, tips on writing as well. They have like a whole mash of poetry that you can have a look through, and if you like some of the poems or maybe like the poet, then you can delve into more of that style or more of their work and see what you like. And it also gets you involved in the community of poetry as well, because they're talking about different maybe poetry events, and overall like magazines and journals are a great way to just kind of get an all-round feel for poetry. So if you are looking for some books when it comes to poetry, there are obviously different ways you can do this. There are anthologies, which are basically a book which is a collection of poems which are from all different sorts of poets, from more classic poets to more modern ones, different sorts of styles, different topics. There's a whole variety, so they are great to dip in and out of if you are a beginner, because then you can find some poems that you like, and then if you like that poem or that poet, then you can delve more into their work and discover that if you like it. And it also helps you give it a good taste for what you don't like as well. So there are usually two different sorts of anthologies. Both of them are basically very similar, it's just the way that you read them is slightly different. So for example, a great poetry anthology to start off with is Poetry Please, which is based on a BBC 4 radio programme which is about poetry, and this is, like I said, it's a bunch of poems. It is in categories about, so it does like friendship, family, nature, love, findings, livings. There's loads in here, and this is the sort of anthology where you can just dip in and out. So you don't have to, there's no order to anything necessarily. You can just kind of dip in and out of this book as you please. You can tab poems like you can see I've done here, and it's just a great one to flick through. And obviously there's quite a lot of poems in here, as you can see. So you don't have to read it all. If you don't want to, you can just flick through, and if there's a poem that you like, you can read it. If not, that's okay. It's just a great all-rounder if you are a beginner. Even though the size looks intimidating, do not be intimidated by the size of anthologies, because at the end of the day, they're not usually meant to be read in one go or all at once. They're something that you kind of take your time with and dip in and out as you please. And it's just a great way to discover some new poets and work out what you like and dislike. And another anthology that I would definitely recommend is Staying Alive, Real Poems for Real Times, which is edited by Neil Astley. And again, this is another anthology just like the Poetry Please one. Instead, with this one, if you do read the introduction, it tells you to read this in order. So you are meant to read that. You can dip in and out of it if you want, but I feel like you get more of a benefit if you read it in order. So again, this has different categories like body and soul, roads and journeys. It has some about life and death, about bittersweet, and each category has a different introduction, kind of introducing each section of the book, and it kind of tells you a bit more about it and sets you up for the story. And I like these as well. Again, this is one that I'm not even halfway through, but it's one that you can still take your time with, and if you want, you can still dip in and out of it. There's no reason why you can't, but I feel like they do recommend that you read this in order to kind of get the full effect and impact that the editor wants you to have when reading them. And the second sort of poetry book I guess you could go for are obviously collections by soul poets. So there are many different types of poetry, there are many different poets, that it can be quite overwhelming, but like I said, if you start off with anthologies, that's usually a great place to start. And as if you like some of their work, you can buy separate collections of that poet's work solely. And I have quite a few collections here. I have some that are more, most of these poets here are more modern or more contemporary, but I feel like they are most accessible to people, as I feel like people struggle to understand poems, like they don't think they're going to be able to understand it, and some of it is very wishy-washy, I'm not going to lie. But hopefully if you guys maybe pick one of these books up, then I feel like they will be a lot more accessible and easier for you to read. So for some collections here, I have some that are from some more modern poets. So we have the very obvious one, which is Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, and I feel like even if you're not really into poetry, you have heard of this book. Rupi is a very well-known and well-loved poet, and I did really enjoy this book. I did my reread not so long ago, and this book comes with illustrations. A lot of these kind of more modern poetry books seem to come with illustrations these days, which adds another effect to it. And this again is very accessible. It's not super flowery or hard to understand. It's quite simple, which is great. And this is a great place to start if you were looking for something that is fairly simple. Same again with this other one, which is Wild Embers by Nikita Gill. And I did love this one. This is probably the least favourite one that I'm going to recommend to you guys. But again, Nikita is a very well-loved poet, and this is very similar to Milk and Honey, kind of covers similar topics and is a similar sort of writing style, which is very simplistic, yet can be very effective. And obviously there are other poets such as Every Word You Cannot Say by Ian S. Thomas, and this again is a book that comes with illustrations and kind of puts the poems in a different format, which can be very interesting sometimes. Personally, I don't always get it when some poets put them in certain formats, like there's one in the shape of a hand here or a whale, and I don't personally see the point in that. But again, this is another great place to start. Just like these other books, they are all kind of very similar. They're not too difficult to understand, the language isn't hard, and they can have a very big impact as well. So if you're looking for something that maybe has slightly more simple writing but yet is still very effective and enjoyable, I would definitely recommend these sorts of books. And some other poets that I personally really enjoy that are contemporary poets, I have Tempest, who is a UK poet, and she's also especially known for her slam poetry. So you should definitely, if you type in Kate Tempest on YouTube or on the internet, go and watch some of her videos because they are awesome. But again, Kate's work is amazing. I feel like it's not too hard to understand. I have two of her books here, which is Running Upon the Wires, which is her latest collection, and Hold Your Own. And again, with like some of these other ones, these are not too hard to understand. The language isn't too difficult, and they're very enjoyable, and it covers different topics, and I really enjoy these. And one of my favourite poets that I could not leave out here is Mary Oliver. And again, her language isn't too hard to understand, but it is still very beautiful, and it is very nature-based, yet it still covers different topics to do with that are thrown throughout life, I guess you could say. And it's very easy and accessible. Her work is wonderful. She has so many books out. I have 1,000 Mornings and Blue Horses here, and I do have another one of her books. But I feel like she's also another great author, or poetess I should say, to start off with. Again, because like all the others, it's not too hard to understand, but it's still very beautiful and easy to understand, yet still has a deeper meaning underneath it. And I guess another way to get into poetry is to look up on Instagram, because there are a lot of Insta poets, I guess is the name for them, where they post little poems on Instagram, on their Instagram accounts, and that's a great way. I feel like poetry has become a lot more accessible and has got a lot more interest since Insta poetry has started, and I feel like it is a great way to get into poetry because it's something you follow their account, so they might post a new one every day or every week, so it's something where you are reading poetry constantly throughout the day, the week. And I feel like that is also another great way to get into it, because obviously it is something that is literally in the palm of your hand on your phone and you have access to it all the time. And when it comes to reading poetry, I guess it's a different experience for everybody because everyone reads a poem in a different way. And I feel like if you are reading poetry and you are maybe struggling to understand it, I would suggest maybe annotating a poem or looking up a video about a specific poem about annotating. You don't have to do this. This is just something that I personally like to do, but because I personally like to pick poems apart and kind of find the deeper meaning of a poem. But obviously when it comes to poetry, a poem may mean something totally different to the person who reads it after you, which is what's so great about poetry in general, about how we all have these different views on it. So you don't have to annotate a poem if you don't want to, but you can research certain poems, especially if they're more well known, and it just kind of helps you make more sense of it. But obviously that is totally optional. You do not have to do that if you don't want to, but I personally really enjoy doing it. And also when it comes to, if you are reading a poem, I would suggest maybe reading it more than once if you don't quite get it first time. Sometimes when I read a poem I'm not quite in the right mindset, so I'll go back and read it again, or maybe another couple of times, just so you can kind of wrap your head around what is going on in the poem. Sometimes that does help if you are struggling to understand what a poem means. And also, one of the best ways that I've always been told to enjoy poetry is to listen to it. Whether that means you reading a poem out to yourself or to family members or friends. I know it may sound weird reading a poem out loud, even if it's on your own, but I do actually really enjoy doing it. It also helps you learn to listen and access and absorb poetry in a different way, which is also why slam poetry and hearing other people read their poems is such a great way. Whether you are watching YouTube videos or you go to slam poetry, you go to poetry speaking events, conferences, there are so many ways that you can access poetry by listening to it. And I believe you can also get poetry books also have audiobooks now, which is great. So you can usually hear the author read their own poems, which is one of the best ways to listen to poems that are their own, because obviously they wrote them so they kind of know how they are going to be said and projected out into the world. So I would definitely recommend going to poetry events or looking up slam poetry or just spoken word poetry on YouTube or the internet. I feel like it is such a great way to access it, and it brings a whole different factor to it because it's like a performance. Slam poetry is performance. Just reading a poem isn't always just a performance, but slam poetry is definitely a performance. It is you can have a fairly average poem, but if you present it and if you perform it in a way that sounds it much more exciting, then people are going to be so much more engaged in it. So I would definitely recommend going to poetry events and hearing people speak, or going to slam events or watching it on YouTube, because that is another great way to access and enjoy poetry. And I guess the last tip that I have for a beginner's guide to poetry is to just have fun and enjoy it. I know people find poetry quite scary sometimes, like I said at the beginning of the video, but it's a form of reading, and I'm sure if you read that you are watching this video, you enjoy reading, and poetry is reading. It is a book just in a different format with less words generally, and I love poetry so much. Obviously you guys should know that, that's why I'm making this video. But like I said, hopefully if you follow some of these tips, then you can learn to enjoy poetry, and don't be afraid to take your own spin on it. Like I said, everybody has a different view or opinion on what a poem means, and poetry is something that is meant to be enjoyed and loved, and it is so important that we keep the poetry world alive and buzzing, and I feel like it is definitely buzzing and getting a lot more attention than it has done in the past years, which I absolutely love so much. So yes, I just enjoy poetry. There is no pressure to do anything, to read a certain sort of poem. If you don't want to read the more classic traditional poets, then don't. You don't have to do that. If you only want to listen to poetry, whether that's through an audiobook or going to poetry readings or watching YouTube videos, then you can do that. Like, poetry is such a personal thing, just like reading taste. So just find what you enjoy and read that and just enjoy, because that is the whole point of reading. So I realise it is very dark now from when I finished this video, because a rain cloud is coming, a storm is coming, but nonetheless I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you found some of these tips helpful. Please let me know in the comments if you do find any of these helpful, or maybe your favourite part of this video that you are looking forward to trying. Like I said, I would love to do more poetry videos in the future. Hopefully I will, and I would definitely like to do a beginner's guide to writing poetry, but that's not going to be for a little while yet, because I still feel like I need to build my own progress, and I don't feel like I'm quite in the place. I don't feel like I'm like as qualified to do that, because I feel like I'm still very much a beginner when it comes to writing poetry, but I will definitely do more poetry videos and hopefully a beginner's guide to writing poetry in the future. If you like this video, then please make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more bookish videos from me, then make sure you hit that subscribe button and little bell icon so you'll be noted every time I post a new video. As always, I will leave links to my social media along with the links to my Goodreads in the description down below for you guys. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!